because I do think about the fact that I am going to die eventually. And I do think about sitting on my deathbed, not wanting to regret the fact that I didn't do more or live a bolder life.
Book reviews have taken on a life of their own in recent years, and in large part due to this individual. An entrepreneur, a podcaster, an athlete, and now an author. The rise of the reader. This genuine, kind, and curious student of life and effective networker. This guy makes reading the cool thing to do. Please welcome my friend and the founder of Book Thinkers, Mr. Nick Hutchison. How are you today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing better after that intro. Listen, I've got to have you introduce me at my next keynote or something like that. That felt good.
Man, well-deserved, well-earned. You created it for yourself. And honestly, I'm so hyped that we're boys. It has been like one of the coolest things working with the Book Thinkers team over the last year or so. And independently getting to know the team. And then by happenstance, we have a mutual friend in common. Shout out to Jimmy, who introduced us. We connected, and honestly, it feels like I've known you for years. I don't know if you have the same feeling. I'm putting myself out there on that, but it's been awesome getting to know you, man.
Imagine if I was like, nope, don't feel that way at all. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I do. I feel like we're cut from the same cloth. I think we both focus on every major area of our life with a lot of intention. You know, I love seeing your content out there. And I resonate with all of it. I really do. So yeah, I look forward to being on this journey with you for the foreseeable future. I know we're both on our way to doing big things.
Likewise, man. Well, on that note, I mentioned at the top that book reviews, just in general, have taken on a life of their own in recent years. And I, in large part, attribute that to you. So I'm going to start by asking you, it may be a bit cliche, what book are you reading now?
What book am I reading now? I'm just starting $100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozi.
And
so
you into
Alex's new book. Oh yeah, I'm super into it. It's a book on lead generation for service-based businesses pretty much. And as I'm growing my team, so now I have 10 people on my team. We support hundreds of authors per year. We're in this revenue growth mode where we know what we do works and we just need more customers. And so lead generation is one of those things that I'm looking to develop within my business. And Alex Hormozi is a great mentor for me. A book mentor, right? I don't really know him very well, but I'm loving the book so far.
I'm just going to give you a bit of credit. You've actually interviewed Alex firsthand, so let's give it credit where credit is due. And I also believe that, to your credit again, Alex cited you in one of his keynote presentations, if I'm not mistaken. So as much as it is a book mentor, I'm sure that either way it's a compliment. So let's give credit where credit is due, man.
Yeah, one day I was just, I've been cited a couple of times. This was really cool. The first time somebody sent me a picture from the audience at a keynote where he was speaking, and he had a slide up behind him with my face and a testimonial about the book that I had written for him. And they were just like, is this you up on screen behind Alex Hormozi's head? And I was like, yeah, that is. That's interesting. He never asked me for permission or anything to use that. But of course, I was happy that he was using it. And I've been a big fan of his for a long time. That was before I ever interviewed him or before we ever had any interaction. So it was a special moment for me. And then I think more recently he used that same testimonial on a slide in a keynote that was posted on YouTube or something. So a ton of people sent it to me.
And so again, staying with this theme of book reviews and to the point where it's getting cited in awesome keynotes by high-level, we'll call entrepreneurs and influencers, what led to the inception of Book Thinkers?
Well, when I was going into my senior year of college, I was not much of a reader prior to that. I was more of the athlete, less of the academic. So I'm going into my senior year and I take an internship at a local software company. It was a sales internship. And early in that experience, my boss at the time, Kyle, he introduces me to the world of personal development podcasts. And, I'm probably when I think about how I was introduced to this, there's this sentence that comes up. I don't know if he said it or I heard it somewhere, but basically the idea that listening to the same song for the 1000th time isn't going to get you closer to where you want to be in life, but listening to the right podcast might. And so I had an hour commute each way every day to this internship. And I just started crushing these podcasts. And what I realized over time was that most of these successful people being interviewed on the podcast were giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And now here I am, like this kind of cocky, ego-filled, late teen, early 20, deliberately choosing not to read. I think it's nerdy. I'm not going to do that. But all these successful people that I want to be like, they're doing that. So I just kind of had that moment of like, if I deliberately choose not to read, then I'm deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And so I decided to go to my local Barnes and Noble, grab a stack of books, and the rest is history. I mean, I literally owe everything in my life to the books that I've read. And so that was sort of the inception for my love of reading.
It's honestly one of those moments where it becomes transformative, where you admittedly recognize this weakness, we'll call it, and a blind spot where you want to aspire to be something greater. And at the same time, you're making an effort to, but then recognize that the main sacrifice, we'll call it, that you have to make is kind of admit this flaw. And then immediately the first thing you do is start acting on it. You buy a stack. You didn't buy one, you bought a stack. What books did you get that made you want to keep going?
Yeah, well, what I recognized listening to these podcasts was that a lot of the same books were being recommended as book number one to start with. Names like Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, or The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And so these were the first books that I went to see if the bookstore had, right? I was sort of ignorant to how this all worked. So I walked into a Barnes and Noble and I'm like, looking through the business section, the self-help section, and all of the books that I was looking for were like front and center and displayed. And I didn't realize that these were all bestsellers. I had no knowledge of the industry. I was brand new to it. So those were the first books that I read. Number 1 was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. 2 was The Total Money Makeover. There were a few more before The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But I read about personal finance and investing because I was a business student that didn't know much about money. And so when I was in school or at school and these high-level business kids, right, like the superstars of my class, they're talking about these investment funds and what they're doing after school and how much money they're going to make and all of this complex language that I didn't understand. But I went from lack of understanding to leading those conversations after a few books. And then it was like, well, man, if I can spend $20 in a few hours of my time and go from insecure to confident in a subject, what other area of my life can I do this for? Pretty much everything. And so, yeah, that's why it was so exciting for me.
So then how did those books and that experience lead to what is now your company, Book Thinkers?
It is a little bit of a long explanation, but I'll try to be brief. And then if anything interests you, we can dive into it. So prior to that internship, I had run a house painting business.
The whole thing interests me, by the way, bro. I'm just going to say that right now.
All right, good. Well, you'll find it. Hopefully everybody does too. So when I was earlier in college, I ran my own house painting business for 2 summers. So I did everything. Door to door, setting up estimates, going back, closing deals, hiring my friends. They would paint the houses. I managed the job sites, collect the checks, pay everybody. It was a lot. And what I realized was that I really enjoyed the selling aspect of it, which is why I went to work for somebody else. I took that internship. Around that same period of time, one of my other friends from college, he also ran his own house painting business. So we had these entrepreneurial minds, right? We were going to take over the world, conquer everything. Business was where it was at, right? The typical like Gary V follower back in the day. And so we'd meet like my senior year. I'm still interning at this company. We'd meet every weekend and we'd go into one of the campus sort of like work rooms with the whiteboards and the markers and the PowerPoints and stuff. And we would talk about entrepreneurship. And we're always looking to solve a problem, right? That's what a business does. It solves a problem for their customer, and their customer pays money to sort of have that pain relieved. And one week I remember saying, hey, Alec, his name is Alec. I said, hey, Alec, everybody's asking me the same questions about these books. I don't know if this is a pain that people experience, but I have to answer the same questions over and over and over again now that like books are my life, right? And I said, let's create a website where we can document all of our favorite takeaways from the books we're reading so that when somebody asks me, hey, what did you think of Rich Dad Poor Dad? I could just send them the link to the website. They could read my favorite takeaways and see if it was a good fit. And so that was the original vision for Book Thinkers, was just a website. A few months later, after we started to build this thing, I reconnected with a childhood friend of mine named Derek. And Derek's like in the tech space and he's building companies and all that kind of stuff super early on. He was always into entrepreneurship. And he says to me, I think we could build a mobile application that can help readers, everybody, all readers, organize their favorite takeaways from the books they're reading and share them with friends and family. So the original Book Thinkers was intended to be a mobile application. In fact, we invested tens and tens of thousands of dollars of our own money as recent college graduates and outsourced the build of this app. So long story short, it crashed, it burned, it fell apart, it never came to fruition. But what did happen was, in anticipation of releasing a mobile app, I started to build a book community online on Instagram and on Facebook. And so while that all fell apart, authors started to reach out to me and they'd say, hey, Nick, I love your audience. In fact, they look a lot like the target reader for my book. Can I pay you for a book review? So while that didn't work out, the mobile application and everything, what did work out was this idea of helping authors promote and market their books, leveraging social media. And then that turned into podcasting and social media management and video content and everything else that we do today.
Honestly, that is one of the coolest stories, that you stumbled upon this opportunity where you've laid out this experience for yourself and you kind of see this landscape where you know you want to add value through literature, through books. And the way you went about it was so unconventional, but conventional at the same time. But what stood out, like your value prop at the time, is, hey, I'm just going to solve this pain point for people that I know. And you didn't even have like the scale, but you were putting yourself in a position to create that reach. And what happens is you end up creating this community. And that is very intriguing to me. This isn't an area I intended to take the conversation, but because you brought it up and it interests me, could you zoom in and enlighten the audience a bit about what it takes to build community, what that looks like?
Yes. I think number one, the community leader has to have a purpose that they can articulate. So Evan Carmichael said it best when he said, your purpose comes from your pain. And so for me, I was in that confusing spot that I mentioned before. I was dealing with some ego that would represent itself at the expense of the people that I was around. I also had a lot of insecurity in my late teens and earlier than that. Public speaking, my ability to communicate, what I looked like. I was always analyzing myself and sort of insecure of how I looked, what I felt like, everything. And so books helped me overcome those very quickly. And I was able to kind of like with pinpoint accuracy, just eliminate all of these insecurities and these pains and these issues that I had in relationships, with money, in my health. I was able to just find solutions for all of it through these books, right? These books condense decades of somebody else's lived experience and how they overcame the same problems you're facing into just days of reading. And so as I started to build this community and make recommendations, people would comment and they'd say, hey, Nick, like that book just changed my life. You posted about it. I decided to read it. Everything's better for me. Thank you so much. And that felt really good, right? So as I continued to learn about my core values and my mission, I started to be able to articulate that to people, like the right book at the right time can change your life. People bought in. They felt like they were part of a community. Then that same author, Evan Carmichael, he wrote a book called Your One Word. And in that book, he talks about how if you can name your community, they'll feel like they're part of a community. So I started to call my followers the book thinkers family. And so people would say, hey, I feel like I'm part of the book thinkers family. That wasn't by accident. It was because I started to name everybody. I started to give them language around this movement that I was trying to create. And so you kind of go from followers to a community to a purpose, like a movement. And how did I do that? Like I said, being able to articulate my purpose to the audience, staying connected to a cause, being super open and vulnerable and transparent, asking for feedback so that people in my community could guide how the page was growing over time, like what types of content are the most valuable, things like that. And the other thing that, I could go off on 100 different directions, but I'll say that The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy was a really important book for my social media growth, because in that book, he says that small steps in the right direction over a very long period of time will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes. That's called exponential progression. And so this same little activity of posting a few times a week, which eventually became daily, and then multiple times per day, that same little activity will eventually lead to this big community. That was the promise. And it did, right? Now we do 1 million impressions a month organically on Instagram, but it's the same activity that I used to do that only got me 100 impressions a month. You know what I mean? So I think consistency is the other piece that I want to throw out there. And tons of other strategies, right? Connecting with influencers, borrowing credibility, leveraging the third door. Like there's all these other things too that worked, but I think those are the foundations.
There is so much value in what you offered the audience right now in my community, where you literally just laid out the landscape again. What I appreciate about your skill set in particular, obviously through the incredible volumes of books that you've read, is the way that you articulate your thoughts. And in speaking with Leet Maltby recently, and who else was I talking to? Patrick Lyons, another dude that you should meet who's coming out with a book. I'd love to make the introduction. I asked them both about why words are so important and why being articulate is so important. I would love to pose the question to you because you've read so many words. Why are words so important?
If you can't effectively communicate what's in your brain to other people, they won't buy into what you're trying to sell, right? That's the basic sales proposition. When I was a lot younger, I really struggled with my ability to communicate from every perspective. I had a ton of verbal pauses, so like, and I couldn't communicate effectively. So I knew that I would have to improve my ability to articulate and find a better way to say what I was trying to say if other people wanted to understand what was in my head. And if I wanted to grow a business and work in sales, which I wanted to do, I would have to improve that skill set. So here are some of the things that I did just to kind of give everybody an understanding of how I went from insecure and very shy and couldn't communicate effectively to where I am today, which, by the way, I still have a long way to go, but I've made a lot of progress and I do want to recognize that. When I ran my house painting business in college, I went door to door every weekend while I was in college for 2 straight years. Hundreds of doors every weekend, trying to convince people to allow me to come back and give them an estimate on painting their house. Door-to-door sales is tough, but with every single experience, I learned something and I was able to get more confident and improve. Number 2, I took public speaking classes when I was in college. They were very embarrassing. The teacher would record you giving a 3-minute speech and you'd finish up and the teacher would say to you, how many times do you think you used the word like in the last 3 minutes? And you'd say, well, I don't remember saying it at all, maybe 2 or 3 times. And then you'd go back and she'd play the recording for everybody and it would be 25 times, 30 times in 3 minutes. And so you would systematically go through your language and try to remove these verbal pauses. For example, I had a couple of my friends in college, if they caught me using a verbal pause, I would have to drop down and do push-ups. It didn't matter if we were at the bar, at the movies, if we were in class. It was so embarrassing that I just stopped using verbal pauses in my language. By the way, I haven't practiced that in 5 or 6 years, so I probably have some today, but that's what happens when you don't pay attention to a skill set. Number 3, I took a phone sales job out of school. And when you're cold calling businesses, you only have a few seconds to make a first impression. And that repetition was thousands and thousands of calls. Then I elevated to somebody who would go out and make presentations in person. And so I was continuing to develop this skill set. Then I moved into social media, creating book reviews on video. And it would take me 20, 30, 40, 50 attempts at recording a video review before I felt comfortable putting it out. Each time I'd go through these videos, I was analyzing my own language, looking for opportunities to improve. And yeah, I'd get really down on myself when the language didn't come across very fluently and I couldn't articulate a thought. So I'd work at it. And so it didn't happen overnight. I put in a lot of work. And like I said, I still have a long way to go, but I do recognize the progress that I've made because I went from inarticulate to a somewhat cohesive thought over the last 10 years.
Man, I gotta say, learning more about you as this episode and our friendship grows, learning and seeing all the different aspects about how you go about your introspection, your self-reflection, your transparency, and the way that you audit your skill set, recognizing that, yeah, you've come a long way, and then you still have a lot further to go. There's a massive tone of humility that's resonating throughout everything that you're saying. Stoicism is obviously something that we both relate to. And you've had the opportunity to interview some very prestigious authors in that particular realm. Ryan Holiday, Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if Stephen would, we're on a first name basis now, me and Stephen, because we email back and forth. I don't know if he would quite align his work with Stoicism, but for me, there's an element of it just because he talks about resistance quite a lot. So what is the role of Stoicism and that philosophy played in everything that you've outlined so far today for the audience?
That same friend that I decided to start Book Thinkers with, Alec, we met on the weekends at school. He was the first one to gift me a copy of The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Prior to that, I had no experience with Stoicism, so this was my first experience. The Daily Stoic, I think the title is something like 366 Meditations on Wisdom, Perseverance, and the Art of Living. And it features excerpts from famous Stoic philosophers like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and so many others. Each and every day, you'd go through one page, and it would kick off with a passage from one of those Stoic philosophers, and then Ryan Holiday and his co-author, Stephen Hanselman, would expand on it and relate it to today. So I started going through the book. Our original intention was to call each other every morning, read the passage together, and then reflect on it together. We didn't keep that routine going for very long, but I continued reading the book. And I was introduced to so many concepts from this philosophy that I've applied to my life, and I've actually tattooed a lot of them on my body, which we could talk about in a minute. Stoicism is a very actionable philosophy. So the philosophy idea that we sit back and we just debate life all day long, that's not what Stoicism's about. It's about improving your life and using these concepts to make a difference today, not a difference for society, but a difference for yourself. So I'll give an example. The idea of memento mori, that we're all going to die soon. That's what the Latin translation says. It's a concept in Stoicism because if you can keep mortality, the subject of dying, in your present moment, you'll act with a little bit more momentum, some juice, some life, some vitality. Because the fact is, we are all going to die soon. But we've pushed this subject of death to the corners of society, right? Hospitals, elderly care homes. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to see it. So we forget about it. And we think, okay, I'll just do that tomorrow. But the subject of memento mori creates urgency in your life to live life to the fullest because you remember that we are all going to die. And I have it tattooed right here, sort of above my heart. I see it every single day when I get out of the shower or whatever the case is at the beach. And I talk with people about mortality as often as possible. So that's one of many examples of how Stoicism has improved my life. and created more introspection, because I do think about the fact that I am going to die eventually. And I do think about sitting on my deathbed, not wanting to regret the fact that I didn't do more or live a bolder life. Unfortunately, so many people, they just float through life, not paying attention to anything. And they just wake up one day realizing that they don't have agency anymore. They're elderly or they're sick and they can't change things. And so I don't want to live with any regret. That's what Stoicism has done for me.
And in all the lessons that you're learning and have learned, eventually it's led to, and you've outlined so much here that I could zoom in on and elaborate on, but you're just encapsulating everything. I don't want to take away from the value that you're bringing. There's nothing else to add. In terms of the next step for book thinkers, for you, you're now an author. I personally have pre-ordered your book, The Rise of the Reader.
Oh, let's go.
Congrats, man. It's massive.
Thank you.
I'd love to learn more about what led to you realizing it's time for you to write a book. And then I want to put on the shelf the next topic. Maybe you touch on it in the book around some of your reading strategies.
Sure. Well, over the years of building my community and interacting with thousands and thousands of readers on a monthly basis, a lot of people said to me, Nick, I appreciate the recommendations. In fact, some of these books can probably help solve a problem or develop a skill set. But I'm having a tough time taking action on the books I'm reading. It feels like I just go from one book to the next. It goes in one ear and out the other. I take great notes, but what do I do with them? And of course, like given my nature, I want to help these people. And so I'd jump on a Zoom call, I'd answer a voice note, maybe type something out via email. But I always felt like I was underserving these people because I knew I was doing more. I just didn't know what I was doing. I never took the time to articulate my own process. So I was presented with an opportunity from a vendor partner of ours. They're a self-publishing services company. The owner of that company had been referring me some business. And at one point, she just kind of said, hey, Nick, if you ever want to write a book, we'd love to work with you on it. We'd comp some services in exchange for some advertising or something. Just let me know. And as people continued to reach out with this same problem, I took her up on the opportunity. I said, yeah, I'd like to write a book on how to get more from the other books that we're reading, how to take better action. And that was a difficult process for me. I thought it would be easy given my discipline and the fact that I work in the space and everything like that. But I don't think I ever gave it the credit that it was due, because writing a book is tough. Writing a good book is even tougher. And so what I started to do was observe my own behavior, like from a third party perspective. What the heck is Nick Hutchison doing to transform a book into results? And so as I started to observe my behavior, I'd put pen to paper and I'd draw this thing out, and I built the framework for a book. And here we are a couple years later, I've been able to put pen to paper and articulate everything that I do, from scheduling reading time in my calendar, picking the right books, setting an intention for each book, effective reading strategies, note-taking strategies, effective retention strategies, implementation strategies, and everything in between. Plus, I highlighted over 100 things that I've implemented from the books that I've read, and I put them into this book because, like I said, these books condense decades of information into days. So I wanted to condense thousands of years worth of information into days as well. That was kind of a fun little thing for me to do. And so that's the result of the book. The book's intention is to help people get more from the other books they're reading and live up to their potential, rise up to their potential. And you asked me about the reading strategies, but before I dive into any, do you want to make a comment on that?
Man, I knew it. I knew that's how you were going to bring everything together. When we initially connected, I didn't know you were writing a book, but I was like, this guy's got to write a book. And so, yes, to answer your question, I do want to comment on it. First off, your process, third-party observation, phenomenal idea, stepping outside yourself to observe yourself, to be kind to yourself, and also acknowledge, there's been a lot of introspection, but you've also outlined it as like a way to go internally is to step outside yourself and be like, hey, what am I doing? What are my behaviors? How can I improve them? And then on top of it, you took the pen, you put it to the paper, you distill your own strategies into actionable steps as to how you can start to make progress, which I know is also a big theme of yours, into results. Now I want to know about the reading strategies. If you could give us a preview of some of the content that you offer up in Rise of the Reader.
Yeah, you know what? There are so many of them, but I'll share one. Let me grab a book. Hold on. Well, I have this book right here, which I've been reading. I read multiple books at a time. So we can go through this one because I've already written my intention for it. But here's the thing. I'll meet people and I'll ask them a very simple question. Are you reading a book right now? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, what are you reading? And they'll tell me. And then I'll say, why? And then they stop. And they're like, what do you mean, why? Well, why are you reading the book that you're reading? And they'll just be stumped. I don't know. I saw it on Instagram or somebody gifted it to me. They don't set an intention for the book. So what I like to do is set a goal, an intention for each book that I read. And I like to set an intention that follows the SMART goal framework. So it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable and actionable, it's written and relevant, and it's time bound. So let's use this book as an example. Afraid, Understanding the Purpose of Fear and Harnessing the Power of Anxiety. So instead of just reading this book and hoping that it's going to improve my life, I'm going to set a goal. And I write them on the inside cover of each book that I read. So let me just tell you this one. It says, intention, find and implement at least 2 strategies for managing fear by the end of September, because fear still holds me back and I want to live a bold life. So now I'm going to read this intention each and every time I read a few more pages of the book so that my brain can filter for those 2 strategies to implement by the end of September. That's how I take action from these books. I give myself a goal, and that goal is actionable. And then I write it on the inside cover of the book, and I give myself a deadline, and then things start to happen. That's only one part of the process, but I think that reading with intention is an extremely important way to get yourself kicked off. And so I'll mention one more thing, which is that by the end of this book, I may have detailed 10 different opportunities to take action. But here's the thing, not every action is weighted equally. Some are higher leveraged, some are lower leveraged. And so what I'll do is I'll write everything down, and then I'll decide which 20% of these activities can lead to 80% of the change that I'm looking to make by the end of the month. And so that's how I'll determine what's the juiciest thing for me to go and get right now. And then I'll plug it into my activity tracker, and the rest is history. It'll happen.
I would encourage the audience to go back and revisit what Nick just shared. It's okay to go back. I reread things all the time. I re-listen to things all the time. It's reinforcement, which is why the duplicative nature of things leads to these results. We do the same exercises every day. We wake up, we do the same routines every day. So go back and listen to the strategies that Nick just shared and that he offers in his book, because you heard a few different themes throughout everything that Nick has been talking about today. Action, intention. These are very, very important words that I lead my life by. Obviously, Nick does too. These themes are so important. And you know what, Nick? Why don't you tell us why they're so important?
Well, I mean, they're important for everything that you've highlighted so far. I think everybody should live a life of intention. The same thing happens at these conferences, right? I just hosted my first event, and I kicked off with a little keynote about, thank you. I kicked off with a little keynote about intention, because sometimes I'll go to these conferences or these events and I'll bump into somebody and I'll say, hey, what can I help you with? What's your intention for being here? And they'll say, well, I don't know. I'm just kind of here to learn. Learn what? Learn what specifically? 2 ways to improve your communication? Let me help you, with that, or whatever the case is. Oh, you're looking to meet 5 authors so that you can set up sales calls with them? Let me introduce you to an author. Like, have an intention so that people can help you along your journey. I think intention is extremely important for literally everything that we do. And like I said, it's one of the best ways to take action by setting an intention for each book. Otherwise, they just become forms of entertainment. There's no difference between playing video games or watching Netflix and reading a personal development book if you deliberately choose not to take action on what you've read.
And I think maybe, and pardon me if I'm speaking out of pocket, but I'm thinking about different strategies that I've implemented when I read. Right now I'm reading The Art of Impossible for the Peak Performer, I think is the subtitle, by Stephen Collar. I don't know if you've read it. Probably you have.
No, I actually haven't yet, but I do own a copy.
I like it so far. A lot of things that you may or may not already know, but he goes into the science behind motivation and intention, action, purpose, flow. And I think about my intention as you were outlining why it's important to have an intention. And I think subconsciously everybody, anytime they pick up a book, has an intention. They just don't necessarily articulate it to themselves. And I think what you've outlined here is the value in taking just a moment to outline why they want to do, and to outline why they want to read the book and actually extract some actionable advice from the book. Reading has also changed my life. It's been this immense tool to help me, like you were talking about, compress someone's experience from decades into days. So this way you can start to make progress on the things that you want to aspire to. So I'm curious where you fall on this spectrum that I'm about to outline. Same 100 books over and over again, or a book a day, a book a week, a book a year? Like, how would you, pardon me, a book a day, 365 books over the course of the year, a book a week, a book a month? Is it the volume, or is it about the quality and the redundance of that same quality over and over again?
I say both. I say there's room for quality and quantity. I think there's value to both of them. I think that even shallow reading of personal development is better than mindlessly scrolling through social media or watching Netflix, right? And so, one of the examples that I like to give for people who are a little bit newer to the space, I like to say, let's replace low impact activity like scrolling social media in the morning, or let's replace a little bit of your Netflix in the evening, not the whole thing. Like, I'm a person, I watch TV. My wife's doing the laundry right now. I can hear her, so she's probably laughing about this, but like, we watch Netflix and HBO and stuff and football at night. But if you could just take 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, that's 30 minutes a day. That 30 minutes is probably about 20 pages for a new reader. If you could do that on all 5 weekdays, right, Monday through Friday, that's 100 pages a week. Most of these books now, they're 200 pages long on average. So that's a book every 2 weeks. That's 26 books a year. So you can fit 26 books a year just by replacing a little bit of your Instagram and a little bit of your Netflix. There's room for quality and quantity if you make it an intention, and if you value these books as much as I do. And so I say a little bit of both. If somebody's new to the personal development space, I'd say lean more towards quantity. If somebody's a little bit seasoned and they know exactly what they need help with, I say lean more towards quality, because that second, third, fourth, fifth time through the book, really meditating on it and reflecting on it, you'll get more out of it for sure. I believe that. And you'll know exactly what you need help with. But if you're like a young 20-something exploring the world, you have no idea what your passion is, you're working a job that you hate, go for the quantity and just read about tons of other people's experiences, and you'll find something, I think, better there than studying the same book 10 times.
The other question great answer. I think another question that I'm very curious about is picking up a book that you don't like. What I mean by that is you start it, you realize maybe a third or halfway through, you're like, oh my God, it's so painful to turn the page. Should I continue? What if there's something on the last page? You skip to the last page. There's nothing there. Do you continue the book? Do you put it down? I know Ryan Holiday, I believe it's Ryan Holiday, has a philosophy around not wasting any time. Or Tim Ferriss also. Maybe it was Tim Ferriss with Ryan Holiday.
It was. Yeah. The rule of 100. They were both talking about it together.
All right. Well, I'm glad you see reinforcement. How do you feel about it? You know the question.
When I first started my reading journey, I would read every word of every book because I thought that's how you're supposed to do it. I was like a purist or something. I don't even know where I got that idea from. And then over time, I'd listen to people like Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss have conversations like the one you're highlighting, where they say, life is too short to read bad books. I think it's Ryan's philosophy that you take the number 100 and you subtract your age. So for me, I'm 29. I have to read at least 71 pages before I can determine whether or not I should continue reading. Because the older you get, the less you have to read because the wiser you've become. That's kind of their argument. And I like that. I think it's a good rule. I think you should read, 100, subtract your age. That's how many pages you should read. And then if you really don't enjoy the book, put it down. On the other side of that equation, I could argue for the other side too, that you are always 3 feet from gold. You never know when a sentence, a word, a paragraph, a page is going to change your life. And so I've been pleasantly surprised tons of times when I'm reading a book, I want to give up on it, and then I discover something that was extremely important for me. So I don't know what the right answer is. I'd say follow your gut. I definitely say don't read bad books. I've returned the money that authors have paid me sometimes when I just can't find something positive to say about my experience with the book, and I'll just return it because the integrity of my business is more important than, the few $1,000s or whatever that I was paid to review a book. So those are some of my thoughts on it.
I'm learning so much today, man. Really. Value packed.
Good.
Every response. And I'm a very curious student all the time. I don't know how many books I've read. I released a reading list. I know you have a reading list. My reading list, the 85 books that have shaped my worldview, the Inspired Reader reading list. And I think a question on everyone's mind, I'm not going to ask it to you, but I'm just speaking on behalf of the audience right now, is how many books you've read. Does it matter?
No. I try to optimize for this. Enjoying the passage of time. That's it. And for me, there are a number of variables that sit under that determine whether or not I'm enjoying the passage of time. One of them for me is progress. If I'm making progress and taking action and improving my health, my wealth, my happiness, my relationships, then I'm enjoying the passage of time. I use books to make progress and to take action. And so for me, it's a variable that contributes to success. It helps me stay in the present moment and enjoy the passage of time. And so that's not a number of books. It's not an outcome. It's a process. And so I'll read forever. And maybe the medium changes. Maybe one day I'll be like podcast thinkers or course thinkers. Like, who knows? But right now it's books. And each and every time I read a book, I can find something that I can use to make progress in my life. And that brings me joy in the present moment. And so no, it doesn't matter how many books you read.
And in all the books you've read, you've actually had the opportunity to interview quite a few authors, obviously, to your credit. We've outlined a couple here: Alex Hormozi, Ryan Holiday, Stephen Pressfield, and the list goes on and on and on. What's your headspace like when you get the opportunity to actually get them on your podcast, interview them, asking questions? How do you know when you're wasting their time versus actually maximizing the value that I know you hold dear because you took the time to read their book, craft the questions, and network to the point where you could actually bring them on your show? What's that process like?
Well, I think most of the value for them comes later on in the distribution of whatever content I create, like putting out the podcast and stuff, because people will buy their books, and that's the original value prop that gets them in the door in the first place. If you can surprise people with good questions, I'm not an expert at this, admittedly, but like if you can surprise people with a good question or pull something out of thin air, like that's related to their past in the middle of an interview, or if you can read past the first 3 chapters and dig something out of the back of their book, there's always like a little light. You could see when people feel good that you've done your due diligence and your homework. So yeah, I think that's the value that they get. The value that I get, like, what's my headspace? I'm a student of life, man. Like, I'm there to ask good questions, to follow my own curiosity, to learn. You've mentioned some of these names, but I'll give an example that kind of blows my mind. So Alex Hormozi paid Grant Cardone, I think it was $150,000 for 3 coaching sessions or something. Layla, his wife, is actually the one that paid it, but that's what Grant's time is worth, right? $50,000 an hour, and Alex paid for it. I've had Grant on the podcast multiple times. I've had the opportunity to hang out with him in person for free, right? And so that's what it's worth to me, $50,000 an hour, because that's what these people are charging. How much would Alex Hormozi charge? You know, if you're paying him per hour, probably a similar amount. And so I'm not going to waste that opportunity. I'm going to do my due diligence. I'm going to ask good questions. I'm going to be present. And I'm going to try to ask things that I can learn, not what makes them look great, not layup after layup after layup, but like, what am I curious about? And so I think the number one kind of comment on my Alex Hormozi interview is thank you for not asking cut and paste questions. Like, thank you for following your own curiosity. Thank you for, asking things that are relevant to you, whatever it is. Because yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to show up and be a student and learn. And, a guy like Steven Pressfield, he's 80 years old. He's lived a long life. That's 8 decades of information that you have access to, and it's sitting right in front of you. And he's wildly successful. And he's somebody who all of the people that we look up to, they want to be like him, right? The Joe Rogans and the Tim Ferrisses, like, they all look up to Steven Pressfield. That's the guy. Ryan Holiday, Robert Greene, that's the guy they want to be like. And so when you're hanging out with somebody like Steven, because you're on a first name basis with him too, is like, get as much as you can out of that. And that's how it's the most useful, I think, to your audience too.
You've touched on so many points where you're making sure you're not wasting anyone's time by following your own curiosity. And I mentioned at the top of this that you are a curious student. What I appreciate about this entire time that we've spent together is the authentic elements that you bring to the table through your curiosity. All the lessons that you've shared, the book that you've written, the podcast you host, the interviews that you get to be a guest on, you're constantly offering value in ways that I think in this space in particular, when it comes to personal development, how people can really start to think differently about their intentions, their curiosity, and their purpose around why they want to get in the same room as someone, why they want to share the mic with someone, how and why they want to ask questions. That it's not just access to the people. Scooter Braun talks about this. We're going to talk about someone who isn't an author for a second. He's like, you don't want me. You want who I have access to. And I think what I appreciate about your perception and perspective around this whole thing is, and I share the same goal. It's that you want to create an experience for the individual, but also make sure that you're getting as much value that the individual has to offer with their time, and treat it with all the gravitas that it carries when you get the opportunity to sit across from someone like Grant Cardone, because as you outlined, the dollar value on their time is extremely high. So when I look at the trajectory of your career, where you start out as this entrepreneur running his own business, painting, slowly building an app that doesn't go your way but evolves into another opportunity, and then it continues into a community, and eventually an author and a content creator and all of these other fantastic aspects of your skill set, something that we haven't touched on yet. We've talked a lot about the mental health, but you're also quite an athlete. Why don't you talk to us a bit about your routines, regimens, philosophies around health and nutrition so people can start to get an idea that it's not just about our mental fitness, right? There's a holistic approach to this whole thing that you've tapped into. Let's get your take.
Yeah, I love that statement that a healthy person has 1,000 wishes, but a sick person only has one, to be healthy again. And so we want to be preventative with our health. We want to prevent disease and illness and the lack of energy that so many people end up experiencing because they neglect their health in the present moment. So I've always been an athlete. Like growing up, I captain of the wrestling team. We played football. I got to play in the Super Bowl and Gillette Stadium and everything like that. And going into college, I really picked up basketball because I stopped playing football and wrestling. And I was in the gym every day and I put on a ton of muscle and I got really into it. And I've carried a lot of those same habits with me post college. So I'm always in the gym. Normally that's 4, 5, 6 days a week just because I enjoy it. Like it makes me happy. I also have a home gym that's in my office space up here. I've got a ton of stuff here as well so that I can keep the exercise endorphins flowing throughout the workday, put myself through a bunch of different challenges. How many pull-ups can I do today? That kind of thing. And, I think what you put into your body matters a lot too. So I'm really focused on my health. I do fasting, intermittent fasting, 7 days a week. The order of my morning routine gets me sunshine before caffeine. And like, I'm all into the biohacking. I take handfuls of supplements that would make most people laugh. But, I love that analogy too, that people say, oh, it's expensive pee. And I'm like, no, you being in a hospital bed, peeing into a pan, that's expensive pee. So all those kind of things just to prevent the negative outcome in the future. I think there's a difference between lifespan and health span, right? So even if I don't necessarily increase my lifespan by that much, I want to be that 80-year-old that's running around with his grandkids, having fun, playing sports, and capable of hiking Machu Picchu, not the 80-year-old that's bedridden and can't experience life anymore. And so I want to extend my vitality as much as possible. Meditation, mindfulness, all this biohacking stuff from filtered water to all of it. I mean, I do all of it. I literally love the space. So yeah, it's so important to me.
Peter Attia vibes all over it.
Yes. Yeah. Big fan of his.
Hopefully, I know he's coming out with a book. I'm sure you two will connect and we can manifest that. So, a couple more questions for you. Have you already interviewed your dream guest? And if not, who is it?
I've interviewed most of them. There are a number of people that I'd like to interview. One of my favorite authors of all time is Tim Ferriss. Tim wrote the 4-Hour Workweek, Tools of Titans, Tribe of Mentors, 4-Hour Body, 4-Hour Chef. And he also hosts one of my favorite podcasts. I'd love the opportunity to interview Tim someday. But let me ask you a question. So you grew up in the area. Are you a Jets or a Giants fan?
Man, I'm going to sit here and tell you I'm an NBA fan, but if I had to choose, the affinity goes to the Giants.
Okay. Well, like Gary Vee growing up in the area, he'd always say that, he wants to buy the Jets one day. And, he would always state that as a goal. And the same as like me, I want to interview Tim Ferriss one day. But then sometimes you'll catch Gary saying that he doesn't actually want to buy the Jets. It's like the pursuit of buying the Jets that brings him energy. And so for me, it's like, I don't know if I ever actually want to interview Tim, even though he'd be like my number one interview, because it's the pursuit of interviewing Tim that kind of fuels me. It's the process of working in the space and interviewing people. And I don't know if I got to that top interview, and Tim became my best friend, like, would I still be as interested in interviewing everybody else? I don't know. So, I think I've interviewed most of those people for me. And Tim is probably like the only. I also really want to interview Joe Rogan one day, and same with Andrew Huberman, but they haven't written books.
Something tells me you're well on your way to all those dream guests. And I think what I'll call you out on is I don't agree with you. I think that once you achieve that peak, you're in that echelon to a degree. And what distinguishes you is the consistency and the ability to maintain it. And there's enough, it's on your shirt, student of life. It's the consistency, and you spoke to it before, that allows you to continue to do this. You have to continue to get better. So even if you get access to that individual, you now have, and I've talked about this before, where the firsthand experience in sitting across from you or any of the other guests that I've interviewed is that I'm taking pieces or a piece that stays with me and is now programmed into my software, my mental software, where I can start to think about things differently. My intention shifts, it gets upgraded, obviously based on the caliber of individuals that I bring onto the show, that you brought onto yours. And you're now compelled, because you have this responsibility to your community that you've built and established, to continue to improve. And so I think that with that, you wouldn't let yourself, whether you have a handful of supplements or like this billionaire type situation, it's not in your DNA, man. And we both know. So I'm calling you.
It's a good call out. It's a good pushback. I appreciate that.
So one last question for you, man. And this is one that I pose to all my guests. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now, assuming he's in that ideal spot, were to fly in today and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
I think he would say, continue to view difficulties as opportunities, failures as opportunities, continue to persist through everything, and that you're on the right path. That's what he would tell me. You're already on the right path. Don't change anything. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Keep thinking bigger, impacting more people, building a bigger business, helping more authors, and keep doing you, because this is working, and don't deviate from the path.
Nick, I've had so much fun today. This was an awesome episode of the show. Please let the audience, the community, know where they can keep up with your journey.
One of my favorite things to do is to play this like book matchmaker role, to be of service again to people who are looking for custom book recommendations. So if anybody wants to DM me at Book Thinkers on Instagram, sometimes it takes me a few days to get back, but tell me about a problem you're facing, or tell me about a skill that you'd like to develop, and I'll give you a book recommendation. Maybe I've got to ask some follow-up questions, but I will give you a book recommendation and even check back in with you a few months later to see if you've read the book and what you thought. So that's my offer to everybody. Book Thinkers on Instagram, that's our biggest community. And from there, there's a link in the bio. You can find anything else that you want to check out.
I appreciate your time today, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.